Ancient Rome was a city of intrigue, conspiracies, and parties that often spiraled out of control. At the center of this tale is Mark Antony, a man who wasn't just a general and an orator, but also a master of chaos. One day, he decided to host an extravagant feast at his villa on Palatine Hill. Seemingly a standard Roman gathering, this party hid more secrets than a Vestal Virgin's diary. Antony sent invitations to all the Roman elite. Even Cicero, his political adversary, received one. Although Cicero loathed Antony, he couldn't decline. The pressure of Roman society was stronger than any sword. The invitation contained a peculiar note: bring your favorite dish. And yes, no speeches allowed. Naturally, Cicero grumbled, but he showed up nonetheless. As the guests gathered, Antony announced that this wasn't just a party, it was a showcase of a new Egyptian game he learned from Cleopatra. The game was called Last One Out of the Bath. The rules: dive into a massive pool filled with milk and honey and retrieve a golden cup hidden at the bottom. The winner would receive an amphora of the finest wine. The crowd laughed, but the game began. Distinguished senators, philosophers, and even seasoned generals floundered awkwardly in the sticky concoction. Togas were soaked, sandals lost, and dignity thoroughly abandoned. Cicero, trying to maintain his composure, stood on the edge, calculating where the cup might be hidden, convinced logic would triumph over chaos. Meanwhile, Antony fueled the frenzy by shouting, "Whoever finds it first gets a seat in the Senate." At last, a triumphant guest raised the golden cup above the surface. Cheers erupted, but then, out of nowhere, a gladiator emerged from the pool. Masked and imposing, he grabbed the cup, leapt out of the pool, and vanished through a side door without uttering a word. The room fell into stunned silence. Antony, grinning mischievously, roared with laughter. Let this be a lesson, my friends. In Rome, you never know who's playing by the rules and who isn't. That was my secret servant testing your vigilance. But here's the twist. That servant wasn't a servant at all. He was a messenger sent by Cleopatra. The golden cup held a secret scroll containing instructions to distract the Senate, while Egyptian forces built a fleet along the Nile. Antony had used the entire event as a cover for a political maneuver, and no one except Cleopatra was the wiser. The moral of the story: never dive into milk and honey unless you know who's lurking beneath the surface. On the last day of Gaius Julius Caesar's life, everything began with a small incident. He simply overslept. The great dictator of Rome, the conqueror of Gaul, failed to wake up on time. His wife Calpurnia had spent the night haunted by troubling dreams and begged him to stay home. But Caesar, as always, chose not to listen. He said that dreams were for poets, not for him, and the Senate was waiting. Being late was the first bad omen. On his way to the Senate, he was constantly stopped by petitioners, flatterers, and the curious. One of them, an astrologer named Spurina, cried out, "Caesar, beware the Ides of March." Caesar turned, laughing, and said that the Ides of March had already come, and he was still alive. Spurina grimly added, "Yes, they've come, but they're not over yet." When Caesar finally arrived at the Senate, all the senators were already whispering. His lateness was being discussed by everyone, from orators to bread vendors. Time, like Rome, belonged to Caesar, and no one dared criticize him openly. But behind the scenes, conspirators were preparing. Brutus and Cassius, his friends and foes, had been plotting for months. They sent daggers engraved with the words, "For the Republic," to the conspirators. On the day of the murder, Brutus stood among the attackers, watching as Caesar entered the Senate, surrounded by flattery and greetings. When the first dagger struck, Caesar still tried to resist. But when he saw Brutus among the conspirators, he lost his strength and said, "You too, Brutus?" Caesar fell and died, and Rome was left in shock. The people, who had admired their dictator just days earlier, now wondered who would take his place. Senators began manipulating the situation, while ordinary Romans argued over who would become the new ruler. The moral of the story is that even great men can oversleep, but being late for the Senate on the day of your death, now that's true irony.